South African news, of course, the country's official jobless rate slowed to 24.9% of the labour force in the second quarter from 25.2% in the first quarter. The total number of unemployed people stands at 4.47 million. The expanded definition of unemployment, which includes people who have stopped looking for work, was at 36.2% from 36.6%. For more now, we're joined in studio by Andrew Levy, Labour Relations Advisor at Andrew Levy Employment. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Good evening.
Can you make sense of these numbers for us? They still sound incredibly daunting.
They are indeed. And I think the first thing that one's got to say is that the labour market is not the same as the JSE. We don't get closing prices every day. We don't get fluctuations which move up and down over a short variable period of time. So in reality, a quarterly report on the labour market is bound to be misleading in a sense, because we've got to take into account that over the year there are cyclical variations. So we see 24,000 more jobs. It could well be just cyclical recovery. The fact of the matter is that if we look at it, we've got to take the expanded definition into account, because in a labour market like this, where there are so many unemployed, the discouraged worker effect takes effect. And so people stop looking for work because they know they're not going to find it. The probability of finding work is going to be such that the expense incurred in looking doesn't pay off. So in reality, we're looking at 36% of the population which does not have a job. Now, there have been very, very small movements, and if you look at the trend, there are minor improvements over the last couple of years. But frankly, given the magnitude of the problem, the sense that I have is fiddling and Rome burning. And what we have is almost a complete dichotomy of opinion in government. It's as if we're living in a schizophrenic world. On the one hand, we hear government saying we're going to create N million jobs by such and such a date. Hasn't happened. On the other hand, we get very, very good and sound and workable proposals from the Reserve Bank, from Pravin Gordhan, about job creation through job subsidies, things like that. But on the other hand, we get this pernicious change to labour legislation around labour brokers, which unquestionably, within the 12 months after its implementation, which is expected September, October, is going to add to unemployment. So we've really got to say, where are we? And why are we living in this cloud cuckoo land where the left hand and the right hand are clearly not only not communicating, but they're working against one another?
I never want to appear alarmist when we work with the unemployment numbers, but I've always used as my base rate the 25%, 24.9%. If we now need to start looking at that 36%, I mean, I know among youth we're sitting at closer to 51%, then it is real cause for concern, don't you feel, Tlelo?
Yeah, you know, I just, as you were talking, I wanted to ask, is it possible to say at what minimal wage the labour market will clear?
Yes. Yeah. It's a very, very good question. It's a very good point. Now, the fact of the matter is, and this is one of the most serious problems that we have, which drives our unemployment, and I would go as far as saying that until we deal with this, we're not really going to get to the heart of it. Our labour market does not clear for the very simple reason that we have a system of centralised collective bargaining which extends wages from a centralised level to everybody in the sector, whether they're part of that or not. Wages are therefore artificially high and have no relationship whatsoever to the marginal product of labour, to the productivity of labour in a particular firm. And all this does is drive grey market behaviour, which is why the whole labour broker thing is topical right now. So, no, right now the labour market can't clear because of that. Now, if in fact we could get down to a lower level, and I think to mirror what Kgalema Motlanthe said at the beginning of the year, we must stop talking about decent jobs, we must talk about jobs. Decent jobs is a luxury we can't afford, and at the current minimum rates, the market will not clear.
But Andrew, are there actual solutions to all of this? Because, I mean, everyone and their dog comes up with a plan to cut this, but nothing actually happens. Is this just because of the bottleneck in government, or is there another fundamental problem with the way our economy is run?
Well, I think it works at two levels. I think, yes, there are fundamental problems, and I've indicated that centralised bargaining is one of them. But I think the other one is possibly a political problem. Now, let's take, for example, the proposed job subsidy scheme. It's been on the table for 2 years. What it means is that people will get subsidized jobs, first-time labor market entrants, which is where we need to make the dent, and they'll work at a subsidized wage, around 72,000 Rand per year, 6,000 Rand a month, and they will work for 2 years. And during that period, they have no expectation of full-time employment. They have no access to the CCMA. People will employ them on that basis. If we look at the textile industry, they did the most wonderful deal at the end of last year. The union agreed to cut the starting wage by 30%, in return for which the employers agreed to increase employment by 15%. And that doesn't cost the fiscus anything. Now, that's what we need. But the job creation scheme is still on the stocks. It hasn't gone, it hasn't launched because of COSATU. At the same time, we have the provisions in the budget, the plans, that we're going to use the money we save on public sector salaries this year, and it looks like we will have a huge saving, because whilst they're still out, we're going to settle at the 6.8, 6.9% level. Now, the saving there was going to drive community jobs. Hasn't happened because of COSATU. And COSATU's attitude is that that is exploitation of labor. People should not be allowed to work. Until government confronts COSATU, and remember that they are behind the labor broker legislation, nothing much will happen. Now, I'm not a political analyst, so I'm speculating, but I think that in a year when we're running up to an electoral process, it's unlikely they would want to alienate that block of votes.
Where are we going from a trend perspective? Can we redeem ourselves from this 36 unemployment rate that we're currently facing?
The way things are currently, it is unlikely. However, before we all start leaping under passing buses and out of convenient windows, let's
because that's where this conversation is leading. We may just pack up shop today.
You know, the fact of the matter is that African economies at this particular point all suffer from the same problem. Now, if we look at the prospect for Africa, 6 of the 10 top growths are going to be here. We look at Mozambique, Angola, DRC, Nigeria, Egypt. They're going to grow. We, unfortunately, as things stand, are probably not. Now, if we can get those levels of growth, we will certainly make a huge dent, because then there will be demand. And fundamentally, our unemployment problem is deficient demand. Now, the economy, I don't believe, will ever grow much above 4.5% with the current labor legislation. But if we took that away, we're talking 8, 9, possibly even more, a number of years of that, and we have made huge, huge dents in this. And of course, the more people work, the more people spend, we get a multiplier effect, and that in itself will increase domestic demand. At the same time, if the world economy begins to turn, and foreign export demand, particularly in sectors like mining, platinum, ferrochrome, etc., that will increase, which has a spin-off on local manufacturing. So yes, but it's a long haul. It is not a short-term fix. It's not something which we should look at the quarterly figures and say, ooh, ah, because it might just be sampling
error. But it also involves radical change in labour legislation. That's really the bottom line.
It involves grasping the nettle, and unfortunately, the nettle is possibly called COSATU.
Hlelo, one last question from you.
Could we be slightly provocative and say that perhaps labor union wages are linked to the cost of living? So at what CPI rate or at what cost of living would the labor market clear?
Yes, yeah. Very good question. I mean, one of the things that unions have done is very successfully keep wages significantly above inflation. So if you look at the rate of increase against inflation since transition, the gap has widened. And so real wages have climbed very, very significantly. Now, unfortunately, we're not getting into what we want to see, which is almost, you could call it a self-funding wage increase. Now, we can certainly pay people above the CPI, if we can recoup through more efficient working that cost. That's not what we're getting. And in fact, what is happening, our unit labor costs are being driven up because our wage costs go up. There is no adjustment on the upside in terms of output of production, and that means our production goes down, and effectively our market is just not going to clear once again. So if we were to back wages onto some kind of productivity requirement, some kind of flexibility requirement from the union, we would be beginning to move. It's not impossible, it can be done. But to get back to the question between wages and CPI, perhaps there has been a period, certainly from 2007 to 2009, where wage increases were far, far higher than the economic conditions would support. It looks as if the trend is falling now, but equally, unless we deal with the other side of the equation, It's just driving our costs up.
Andrew, always good chatting to you. Thank you so much for your time. Andrew Levy, Labour Relations Advisor at Andrew Levy Employment.